Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and welcome back to Goosejunkies. It's been a while, but we are glad to be back for this episode 15, aka the first episode of our season 2. I'm joined tonight with some good panelists, and you might recognize them. We have up in the left, we have Ultimate Goosebumps Man. How are you doing tonight, Micah?
I'm doing pretty good. Back home for the summer, done with the semester, so now I can just kind of mostly chill outside of getting a job. But
Glad to hear. And speaking of school, we are joined with BD, who goes by now the Horror Tavern. How are you doing tonight, BD?
Yo, 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 people and patrons of the night. It's your boy BD, the host of the Horror Tavern. Talking about mummies today. I'm on the outlook, trying to find a Cleopatra I can give this Egyptian cobra, much like the dad from the Guardian's Curse episode, because you know what he goes for at the end of it. Hope you guys are doing well. Return of the Goosejunkies. And yeah, hope you guys are excited. We're going to be doing a lot more episodes during the summer because me and Micah's schedules are freed up. And I know Bruce and Alejandro are free as well. So, welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, welcome back, y'all. And we're also joined with our two kid panelists on here, but they're awesome. How you doing tonight, Bruce? Who, if you don't know his channel, he is the Goosebumps enthusiast.
I'm doing pretty good, and although BD thinks so, sadly I cannot share the same pleasure of being able to be off from school, so I still got a little bit to go, but I'm gonna power through this lock-in season. And you know what it's also time to lock in for? Goosebumps, because a lot of new stuff is being announced lately. Who's excited for season 2? I'm not. I'm not at all.
I'm cautiously
Amazing
optimistic. Knowing
transition.
that they're going a different storyline, I'm cautiously optimistic.
I'll give it a fair chance.
And last but not least, we have Alejandro, Goosebumps for Dummies. How you doing tonight, dummies?
Doing pretty good. I'm very excited to be back here doing another episode of Goosejunkies. I know it's been a hot minute and quite excited to talk about this one because the scores for each of these are actually pretty darn close. So yeah, this is gonna be a very interesting episode for me. And I'm very glad to be back, like I said, and I'm almost done with school, so hopefully I'll have a lot more time during the summer.
Oh yeah, I think I'm hoping that my work schedule is more balanced because I got a new job recently. So trying to find, I'm gonna have like 3 days off in a row, so we're gonna have plenty of time to record episodes for you all out there on YouTube. Uh, we love doing these, and for our episode coming back, we actually promised this before we had in season 1. We're doing a mummy centered episode tonight. We're going to be talking about the short story and the ever so, I think, underrated episode from the original Goosebumps show, Don't Wake Mummy. And we're going to be facing it off against Are You Afraid of the Dark's The Tale of the Guardian's Curse. Now, we, I think we should know a little bit about the story, so I'm going to pass it over to BD. What is your thoughts on the Don't Wake Mummy short story?
The Don't Wake Mummy short story was a first time read for me. I've seen the episode as a kid. All I remember was it scared the daylights out of me. So I was interested to see how the short story tackled it. So the short story deals with the same kids. You have the little brother, you have the sister, and you have the mom. And they get a package delivered to them. They get a mummy sarcophagus with chains wrapped around it. And they basically bring it down to the dark and dingy basement because their father is actually the curator of the Museum of Natural Science in their town. So they suspect that he's actually getting this as a part of a museum exhibit. They're going to keep it down there. And you find out that the main kid, I think his name is Jeff, could be wrong, but Jeff is pretty much a scaredy cat. He reveals through monologue that he's always getting tormented by his older sister. He's 11 years old, she's 13, so older sister always giving him a hard time. And he tries to basically prove himself a lot of the time that, hey, stop picking on me. I'm not as much of a scaredy cat as you think I am. And one night, his bravery gets put to the test because as he's sleeping in his bed, it's a dark and stormy night. He hears basically a giant storm going off. There's wind, rain, lightning, and he starts hearing these strange thumps down in the first floor of his house. And it's basically a methodical thump. There's one thump, quiet, he hears the storm, next thump, then thump, then thump. And he starts realizing these sound like footsteps. And he starts getting paranoid because his sister has been messing with him earlier, talking about, mummies coming to life, them being these malevolent spirits that try to steal life from other people. So he's a little bit paranoid right now. And eventually his mom ends up coming into the room. It was a false alarm. She reassures him, no, 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 don't be worried. You probably imagined the noises. It was probably a bad nightmare. And she comforts him. And then as soon as she leaves, he gets confronted by his sister later. And she says, no, no, no. I heard those noises as well. So if you really want to prove to me that you're not as much of a scaredy cat as I think you are, you should go and confront the mummy as soon as you start hearing these thumping sounds. And he then gets a dare. And he has to either choose to live up to the dare or not live up to the dare. And the next night he hears these same noises and he decides, you know what, I'm going to confront it. And you basically end up with a pretty dark reveal that the mummy may or may not be alive. It's horrifying. It's got these chains wrapped around it, and he realizes that my life may be in danger. And I forgot to mention this before, but there's actually a deviation from the short story to the episode where, because he was paranoid about the dare, he hit up a local store full of like antique items and different memorabilia. And there was this eccentric kind of store owner. Yeah, he's like an older guy, and Jeff tells him, you know, I have this mummy that got delivered to my house because my dad is a curator of a museum. Do you have anything that potentially could ward off evil spirits with that embody the mummies? And he gives him a little pouch. The pouch has these golden eyes surrounding it, and it's this blue dust. And he says that this is mummy dust. Yes, this is the peak of Stein's writing. It's carrying mummy dust as celebrated with that. And he basically then brings it to his house. He uses it to ward off the mummy, and he tries using it against it that night, and stuff starts going wrong. And then you find out that maybe there's more than meets the eye. Maybe one of the family members actually knew something, a piece of information that they were hiding from the kids. And when they try to resolve the situation, you actually get something very rare in Goosebumps. You get a point of view change. And this point of view change is quite sinister. That point of view change revolving around one of the characters and some dark fate that awaits them, that scared me. That got to me. So that's basically the story without me trying to spoil too much, because again, it's like a 13-page short story. It's very easy to spoil. In terms of how I feel about it, at first I thought that the short story was pretty average. I like the idea of the mummy being wrapped up in chains. It's a small kind of visual thing, but just the idea that the dead body of this potentially dangerous mummy is wrapped up in these chains, and then you hear this progressive thudding sound at night indicating footsteps, and you hear chains rattling. I don't know if you guys know about the short story. I presume a lot of you do, but it reminded me of the Big Toe from Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, where the kid is hearing these footsteps coming up the stairs, and it's quite horrifying. And this reminded me of that, kind of like the Goosebumps version of it. And aside from that, I mean, Jeff is an all right main character. He's pretty typical, a scaredy cat type of kid. The rest of the characters are average. The mom is pretty involved within the kid's life. She's a nice little character, even in this short story. And the mummy dust, that was pretty goofy to me. I'm not going to lie. We're going to talk about the episode in a bit, but the episode takes a much darker approach as to how to potentially defeat the mummy. This mummy dust was pretty much a gimmick, and the main character says he paid 20 freaking bucks for it. I would never pay 20 bucks for a little bit of blue powder and a pouch sold by an eccentric crazy guy. But he does so. And honestly, it would be an average short story to me if it was not for that POV change. Goosebumps rarely does POV change. I know books like Fright Night has done it recently as a modern. So it's a rare thing to experience in Goosebumps. And it's horrifying because you find out that one character pulling pranks may potentially backfire on him. And it is terrifying. There is a scene from the episode involving a basement, and this is quite similar to that. But yeah, it's quite the dark fate for a Goosebumps character, a little bit of comeuppance potentially for one of the characters in the book. And overall, I'd probably give it a 7.5 out of 10. It's a pretty good story. Nothing too crazy that blows me away, but it's fun enough. So I'd like to hear everybody else's thoughts about it.
Yeah, it's great. That's a great jumping off point. I think you made some good points. Alejandro, what is your thoughts on Don't Wake Mummy short story?
So I'm probably going to be very indifferent from a lot of people on this one. This short story, I think, was a very interesting approach to a mummy story, having the mummy literally in the house. Now, this has been done, I think, only one other time in Goosebumps, where I think it's a modern book as well. It's kind of in the house. Only that one was a large house. This is like an average house, so it ain't gonna be like 100 feet away. It's literally in your freaking basement. So it's pretty scary concept, but there's a mummy literally in your basement. And that is pretty dark. And also the ending, I want to just jump straight to this. The ending is really my favorite part about this short story. I thought the ending was very above average and pretty darn dark. I like what happens to the sister character. I think it's pretty neat. I haven't seen many Goosebumps books end on such a dark note. It doesn't completely give away what's happening, but you can kind of fill in the blank about what's about to happen. And yeah, I just really like that part of the book. Now, there's some interesting stuff thrown in here, like the mummy dust and the magic shop, or whatever the hell it is. It's not really a magic shop, but I compare it to one like if y'all notice people watching Sardo's magic shop from Are You Afraid of the Dark? It's kind of like that. That's where this character gets this mummy dust from. I thought that was a cool little element thrown in there, and it's very different for a Goosebumps story about a mummy having a freaking magic shop. And yeah, I thought it was very unique. I thought the characters were just all right. Uh, the mom character was above average. She was a very caring mother, but the father and all the other characters that were in the book, or sorry, the short story, or at least present, they were just all right. There's nothing really special about them. And I think the mummy scene, where a certain mummy shows up, is quite cool. It isn't quite as awesome as you'd think, because I think there's a twist thrown in there, if I'm remembering right, kind of a does a Night of the Living Dummy approach. You know what I'm talking about. But still, it is a nice look at the mummy. I think it is pretty cool. And yeah, it was above average short story for me. I think it was pretty darn good. It has some dark elements thrown in, which I'm a sucker for. And I'm going to give this like a 7.5 out of 10 if I had to rate it. Surprisingly, the same BD score. I'm not copying you, I swear. I literally have it written down over there. 7.5 out of 10. So, yeah, very good short story.
All right. So it seems everybody is unified so far. Micah, what is your thoughts on the Don't Wake Mommy short story?
I thought it was a pretty solid short story overall. I'm not a huge fan of some of the short stories are kind of very iffy from the Tales books, but Don't Wake Mummy is definitely a very solid one. I feel like I do think that Jeff and Kim as characters do get kind of annoying after a while, especially in the short story, just because Jeff is kind of whiny and just very, I don't know how to describe him, but it just gets kind of obnoxious after a while. And then, Kim is very, I don't know. I just feel she's a little bit annoying too in the short story with her incessant pranks and things like that, and kind of constant mocking. But I do like the atmosphere. It has some really good atmosphere, like BD pointed out, with like the sound of the thumping footsteps was really cool and built up some nice suspense in it. And as we all mentioned, the dark ending is really cool. I always love when Goosebumps goes that route and goes really dark with the twist, because it doesn't outright tell you what happens to this character, but it's pretty heavily implied that something horrible is about to happen. I just think that's kind of cool that when Goosebumps can go, well, is willing to go that far or imply that kind of horror, I guess, that wouldn't find mostly in a lot of kids' media nowadays. And I give it around a 7 out of 10. Just I don't know, I deducted a little bit because of I just didn't like the characters all that much, and I thought they were a little bit annoying. But other than that, I thought it was a great story, and I like that the dad was actually involved in the climax, which is different from the episode. So
Yeah, and coming from somebody who loves this short story, I totally see y'all's biggest gripes with it. It seems to be the characters and maybe some of the bits with the mummy dust getting in the way of enjoyment. But for a short story, if y'all don't know anything about me, Tales to Give You Goosebumps is one of my least favorite series from Goosebumps. I'm not, I'm like half and half with most of the stories, but Don't Wake Mummy is one of those. It's a short and sweet one. It's 13 pages, but there's actual darkness and it feels whole. Like this, you start off with the concept of Jeff. He's at odds with his sister Kim. Kim is pestering him. He's given kind of a blessing and a curse at the same time, with the mummy literally arriving on his doorstep. This is a concept that should not work because who ships an Egyptian mummy to their house? I mean, it's so absurd, but it's Goosebumps, so this is the time to be absurd. And it weirdly works in that way because the dad is really the only one that knows how to handle this mummy besides the mom. And what's different about this story that I think makes it shine over many Goosebump stories for me is the fact that the parents are so proactive in this story. You wouldn't think that going into it, but they play a heavy role, especially in the back half of the story, trying to resolve the situation. Maybe the dad comes back home and helps out the mom, trying to figure out how to handle the situation. But you also get this sense of finality with Jeff and his sister Kim's struggle throughout the story, and maybe the character gets some vindication. I'm not going to spoil which one, but you get a sense of they finally get their revenge without having to get their own hands dirty. You know what I mean? So it's just one of those stories that weirdly work because the way I see it for like short stories, as long as it's fun and it feels different and it's unique, I'm a lot more forgiving on the flaws. Yeah, Jeff, it can be whiny and annoying, but seeing his relationship with Kim, I kind of understand. Kim is pretty much the more annoying one to me because she's the older sibling. She just constantly does it to get because she can get away with it. Because this is actually one of the stories in Goosebumps because Stein, for some reason, likes to write this trope where the youngest kids get the short end of the stick and the older kids get, the parents, the parents' eyes or affection more, or they believe the older siblings for some reason. When in actuality, at least from my experience being an older sibling, it's actually reversed. But seeing this story kind of execute that in a more humorous way wins me over. And the dark ending, honestly, it's probably one of the darkest endings in Goosebumps history. I think we've all established that. But the reason why it works so well is that it leaves you on that stinger. It leaves you on that unknown. It doesn't show you too much, maybe like a werewolf skin type of ending where you can easily imply what's about to happen. It's like one or two things. This one is more ambiguous and it's more haunting for that, so it sticks with you more. Yeah, I really love this short story. Y'all probably don't want to hear what I give it. I probably give it like a 5 out of 5 or a 10 out of 10, but that's just me being more forgiving on it than most things. So I have a soft spot for it. Um, and I think Bruce said he unfortunately didn't have time to read the short story, so we're going to skip over him. But I think Spongy had notes on the short story. BD, do you want to read off Spongy's notes
Yeah, let me
real
go
quick?
pull it up. All right, so for the Don't Wake Mummy short story, and apologies if I cough during this video, I've been a little under the weather. So he says this is the basic mummy story that works. There's nothing that's special to it per se, but I like the build up with the mummy in the basement trying to get out. There's some decent humor as well. I love how the mom is helpful. That's how you know it's ghost ridden. Whoa. And I like the twist with Kim due to it being satisfying. It's fairly standard, but it has enough nice touches to work. So those are his thoughts on the short story.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that Spongy, he's also another panelist. He can't make it for this recording. Sometimes he can, sometimes he can't. But we're gonna be reading off his thoughts as we go along here tonight. And I do like that Spongy brought up the point that he thinks that it's ghost written because there's a good amount of confirmed ghost written short stories already, like Fun with Spelling and Why I Hate Jack Frost are two hard confirmed ones. And Don't Wake Mummy does feel like something that Stein maybe would do, but he wouldn't execute it that way. I don't think that Stein probably came up with the whole concept. Maybe he came up with the skeleton and the Ghost Rider finished it, or maybe the Ghost Rider wrote it, but it doesn't really feel like something he would have done, at least back in the day. Because the POV change, I think, is the big giveaway. That's a little too experimental, at least for back then, at least pre-Series 2000, where you got more of that. So, yeah, I think Spongy's on the point there. And seeing that he thinks that it's fine too, in like maybe a light good way, I think we're all in agreement that the short story is at least good, right? So that leaves us to the episode. And the episode, I guess I'll give you a whirl what the episode's about. So the episode is one of those in the original Goosebumps show that took some liberties to change up the source material. So it makes it revisitable for that as an alternative to the short story, which off the bat I think is a good plus for this episode. And I mentioned this early on. I think this is one of the most criminally underrated episodes of the whole original show. It's so overlooked because it's tucked in like I think back half of season 2. I think this was like the first short story they ever adapted. And yeah, I think more people need to tune into this. So you have the same characters as before. You have Jeff and Kim's mom, and then the dad's in the story. But there's also a new character of Kim's friend, right? So the plot of this is a little bit different. We have Jeff obviously getting pranked by his sister Kim, who's played by AJ Cook. If you don't know who AJ Cook is, she was in Final Destination 2 as the lead girl. So if you like that movie, you might enjoy this episode. But Jeff is being pranked by his sister, and it's only made worse when the father, who's over in Egypt, ships home accidentally a mummy to the house. And the mom is a Egyptologist as well. She can read inscriptions and stuff. And it turns out that this mummy, way back in the day, probably was like a feared ruler or killer or something. And there's like a seal on the sarcophagus. And Kim and Jeff are playing around down in the basement with the sarcophagus, and the seal breaks. And they don't know anything until Jeff comes down to the basement and sees the iconic scene of the mummy casket opening, and then you see the mummy inside, and then the mummy rises up and turns his head and like scares Jeff half to death, because whatever happened down there when they broke the seal possibly brought the mummy back to life. Well, as the story goes along, we see Kim and her friend playing this prank with this mummy, because now Jeff is like paranoid with mummies. And this plays into the climax where Jeff thinks that his sister's just pranking him. And then Kim's like, okay, she's off with her friend. But then the real mummy comes to the forefront. And then the climax ensues. The mom gets involved. And it's a little bit different than the short story, because in the episode, it's played like a horror movie almost, because the mom is freaked out. Obviously, the kids are freaked out, and they have to use a certain mechanism to try to defeat the mummy. I don't want to spoil what it is, but it leads them downstairs into the kitchen, where let's just say a garbage disposal is used here to do away with this mummy, and it's actually done up pretty well, at least for this Goosebumps show. You got to remember, this was a TV Y7 show on Fox Kids and YTV in Canada back in the 90s. It couldn't go too dark most of the time, but this one was actually played up very creepy and very tense. And the dad's not involved like the short story and the climax. That's another difference. And we get to see the finality of what happens after that. But unlike the short story counterpart, instead of getting that dark, POV change of an ending, we get a little more lighthearted ending involving a certain animal that might have been associated with the sarcophagus from earlier. So, yeah, the episode, in my opinion, kind of lives up to my thought on the short story. What I love about this episode and what it's able to do is that it's a very intimate setting, being in the house the whole episode. There's something about its execution that makes it more creepy, because the mummy is downstairs in the basement and the safety is upstairs. But when the mummy leaves the basement and goes into that area of safety, you start to feel more uneasy. And the way that's shot, I don't know if y'all notice this, but the way the mummy walks up the stairs when Kim realizes what she's seeing, absolutely petrifying. And that also plays into the smoke coming out of the mouth of the mummy when Jeff sees it rise out of the sarcophagus. That was creepy as hell, y'all. And it blows my mind that it's the same mummy costume that was in Return of the Mummy from season 1. They repurposed it, but they did a couple different mummy things to make it stand out as an episode. And like I said, that second half of the episode is played up like a horror movie, and it's done pretty well. I really enjoyed this episode. Like really, it's probably in my top 10 of the original show. I probably give this like a 4.7 out of 5. So I'll pass it around. Whoever wants to take it next. I'm gonna pass it to Bruce since he didn't comment on the short story. Bruce, what's your thought on the episode?
So, although I never really seemed to recognize this one when I was a younger fellow, in recent times this has become one of my favorite episodes in the entire series, and one that I very leisurely like to watch just out of nowhere. Probably a top tenner for me, and this kind of marks the end of an era, as I think the first 2 seasons of Goosebumps, as we can agree, were very solid, very confined, I guess. But after that, and this is like one of the very last episodes of that period, after that, things very quickly start to like kind of slip. Um, that may partially be due to more of these tale stories being added and adapted. And honestly, I think this is one of the only ones I think is actually good. I mean, a lot of them are just okay, or actually, there's a lot of bad ones too. But yeah, it's a really good story. I really like the effects. I think that although I can see some of the characters being annoying, something works here. That it has like a specific mood, a specific vibe, I guess. That kind of reminds me of something like Tale of the Blue Monkey from Ghost of Fear Street. I don't know if anyone else caught that, but it just has like a weird, like homey vibe. I like it. Um, there's not much to say besides the fact that it's basically what most fans wanted with Return of the Mummies episode, which I think is kind of a failure, but done way better. And I really like the setting of this being in such a random setting, honestly, for a mummy story, a house, but it works. It really works, and it's creepy as fuck. So if it can scare me, it will surely scare younger kids. And yeah, I had a lot of fun with this episode. If anybody hasn't seen it, I definitely recommend this one. It's a blast every single time I watch it. I always see myself coming back to this one as to other episodes, or even some that I like more. I still just think, yeah, this one's one of the ones I think is the most fun. So, 10 out of 10. Really like it.
All right, that's a pretty good score from you, Bruce. All right, let's pass it over to Micah. What is your thoughts on the Don't Wake Mummy episode?
So I love this episode. I agree with a lot of you. It's definitely a very underrated episode. In my opinion, I think it's better than the short story by a decent margin, like by a whole two. I gave it a 9 out of 10, so it's about 2 points better than the short story for me. But I think Jeff as a character is much more likable in the episode. I know a lot of people may think he's still a little bit annoying, but I don't know. There's just something about the way the actor portrayed him that adds some kind of charm to it, for me at least. And it kind of makes him more sympathetic because there's a lot of moments he really does sell the fear that this kid's probably facing in the situation. And I also, again, the mummy is creepy. Like the mummy is just the costume for it looks fantastic. The stuff they do with it in the episode is really well done. There's some great atmosphere, and just the performer who was in the suit for the mummy did a great job as well portraying him. I think the climax is a little bit better. It's kind of a bummer that you don't get the dad like you do in the short story, but I still think the climax is phenomenal. I think the way they deal with the mummy is a lot better, and yeah, it doesn't. While it is lacking that kind of creepy and dark ending, I do like the ending to the episode. It is a very fun kind of way to end it off, and it fits the tone of the Goosebumps TV show more, which usually kind of was more goofy and had more cheesy and silly endings a lot of the time. So I love this episode, and it blows my mind that like so many non-Goosebumps fans, like hardcore fans like us, a lot of them will say that Don't Wake Mummy is better than Return of the Mummies episode. But it blows my mind how many like casual Goosebumps fans or just people watching the show will rank Return of the Mummy over this one. Because that's a rough episode.
I've noticed that same phenomenon too, Micah, and trust me, like as somebody when I first watched the whole show, like for the first time ever, like in succession, after when Netflix had it, when I was able to binge it for the first time, I remember I got to Don't Wake Mummy, and I'm like, I don't remember why people used to bash this one because I thought it was a pretty great episode, and then I was reading online and people had just had this stigma against the Goosebumps mummy stories like from the books, and I think it's carried over into the episode because they don't know that Don't Wake Mummy is a short story, not a made for TV episode. There's some people out there that don't know that this was based on a short story from Tales. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm glad that you brought
the
that
thing
up.
is like yeah, like I remember watching like people like I can't remember the channel, but they did like tier lists of every Goosebumps season, like they were making it like in a live stream or something, and they put Don't Wake Mummy in the F tier of season 2.
That's cap. I'm sorry, that's cap.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if you're out there and you hate Don't Wake Mummy's episode. I'm calling you out now. You're cap, okay? Don't be dissing that. All right. So with that being said, let's pass it over to BD. BD, what's your thoughts on Don't Wake Mummy's episode?
So I've not seen the Return to Mummy episode as an adult, but I used to love the Mummy episodes as a kid. Seen Return to Mummy as a kid, and I watched this one, Don't Wake Mummy episode as a kid, and this is the only Goosebumps episode. So I'm putting this on record. This is the only Goosebumps episode as a kid that genuinely scared me. And watching it as an adult, yeah, not much has changed. This is still a very scary episode, and I have to say that I would rank the episode as being a not massive, but I agree with Micah. It's a big improvement against the short story because it adds a lot more layer. It's a lot scarier. You can see there's more effort put into it, obviously, because a 13-page short story versus a 20-minute episode, they took the creative liberties to make it more intense. So this one I actually gave a 9 out of 10. So I'm right there with Micah. This is a great episode to me, and I'm a harsher critic, so a 9 out of 10 really does speak to the quality of the episode, in my opinion. Some of the things that I really enjoy about it, again, since I've not seen the Return to Mummy episode, the mummy design in this episode is nightmare fuel. I've always been a guy who's scared of basements. My house does not have a basement. In my room, I have a crawl space. There's a claymore set up right next to it. I hate dark and dingy spaces down below. So the idea of a mummy coffin being put into the basement of this house is horrifying. And the sister actually does, or not the sister, but I think Jeff actually has a really good line in this episode. It was simple to the point, but I like it. And he said, I don't care that it's a mummy. It's still a dead body in a coffin down in my basement. And I'm like, you know what? That is a really good atmospheric setter right there, that you have a corpse lying in the basement. And as the episode goes on, the mom figure actually reveals something really cool about the mummy. And that's that this mummy was a killer. He was not a good person when he was alive, despite him being royalty. And you start getting a little bit tense in your, in your heart that you're like, oh, this is a malevolent person that basically is locked up in there. And as a kid, it would scare you, even as me as an adult it scares me. The basement scene was brought up when Jeff is actually locked down in there. That scene is horrifying. Just the idea of him running up to the basement steps, not being able to do it, and right when he gets to the very last step and he looks over the banner just at the open coffin, that is a terrifying scene. And just the idea of him having to walk past that thing, get to the locked back door and try to force it open. And I swear to God, this thing is horrifying. It has one dead eye and one eye that's alive. When this thing stood up, I shit myself. I'm not gonna lie to you. The whole toilet run before this episode, that's for that. I shit myself when this thing stood up. That is scary as all hell. It turns around, looks at this guy, and there's smoke coming out of its mouth. It zooms in on that one alive eye just staring at him. And again, this pure white fish like dead eye just staring him down. It's horrific, dude. And I was 100% expecting this thing to get up and attack him, but no, he manages to get out. And what's scarier, once his older sister gets down there, nothing happened. It's just lying dead. But, and this speaks to the writers and producers, they added a nice little touch. They uncrossed the mummy's arms. So the mummy's arms was lying against its side instead of being crossed. And the friend notices it. And that again sets up the atmosphere of the episode. Again, the climax scene is terrifying. When that mummy walks up the flight of steps and it's completely in black silhouette, that is terrifying. That is the bill collector getting in my house. Horrific stuff, just seeing this menacing figure right at the stairs in all black. And when it starts crawling up or thumping up to them, this thing is badass. I gotta say this. I mean, this is not like my top 10 or top 20 villains, but in my top 30, I would probably put the mummy from this episode. The way it's portrayed in this episode is horrifying. It right away starts trying to swing at the kids. There's a scene when it gets downstairs and it smacks a chair and the entire chair rips in half. I was like, holy shit, dude, we got a badass here. And then when the thing reaches out and grabs the older sister, because the older sister is wrapped up in mummy cloth. That's payback, bitch. Okay, this man thinks that you're his ex-lover out there. He's trying to get you now. The man grabs a hold of her arm. She tries to rip it away, and the whole arm comes off with it. Both the kids fall down the stairs, and this, and apologies to curse y'all, this, but I gotta say it, as Samuel L. Jackson would say, this motherfucker comes down there, grabs the arm, puts it on the wrong way into his socket, and then twists it, and you hear this crunch noise. I was like, dude, they're going the extra mile with this mummy. They're making him really imposing, really menacing. Some of the stuff involving him is disgusting. When the kitchen scene gets there and his heart gets launched from the jar into the disposal and it's thumping, that is horrific, dude. And you can just see that as soon as they turn on the disposal, he starts physically, like, contorting himself and starts suffering. And Jeff actually gets a redeeming moment for his character. He gets to show his bravery, much in the line of, if you've read Are You Terrified Yet? Craig, Scaredy Cat, gets his redeeming moments. This guy, Jeff, gets his redeeming moments. He actually has a fight scene with the mummy that is very clever, and I've said that 50 times this episode. It's very cleverly done because on the TV, him and his sister were watching the Universal Monsters movie of the mummy, and it's portrayed as the same type of attack scene. The way the mummy was attacking the guy in that movie is how this mummy is attacking him in real life. So when Completionists brought up the horror movie feel of it, they also played into that by contrasting both of those things. So this is a really well done episode. It is great, y'all. I suggest all of you watch it. It is scary. It's horrifying. You get some really good family bonding stuff involving the characters, and I actually like the fact that the dad is not involved in the episode. He's out in Egypt for the sole reason that it makes you get the feeling that the family is vulnerable. This father figure, this guy who's knowledgeable about the mummy, is not with him. He's out in another foreign area. So they're basically all left to themselves, defenseless against this serial killer mummy. That's horrifying, really, really scary. The only complaints I have, I actually don't mind Kim that much, only because in the episode, I think that her mean spirited pranks actually add a little bit of charm and it puts Jeff into situations like the basement scene that's very, very scary. But my kind of problem with the episode, and again, it got a 9 out of 10, so not too much detracting, but I don't like Jeff in the episode. In the short story, I thought he still had some backbone to him, but in the episode, he's really freaking corny. I mean, he's always acting over the top, basically damn near goes, "Oh, gee willikers, the mummy." I don't like that. It just seems over the top. It's played up. He gets a good redeeming moment at the end, but he can be obnoxious at certain points because the man will literally be picking off olives from his pizza and is acting like he's picking out eyeballs from a corpse. He's like, it's just over the top. I mean, maybe it's not his fault. That was probably just the directing choice. They wanted him to play an over the top caricature. But yeah, not really a big fan of that. But regardless, still a great episode, really good story. And I agree, it's underrated. More people need to rate this one. And from what I remember of Return of the Mummy as a kid, I still had this one higher up as a child, and I'm probably going to keep that. I love this episode. So that's my thoughts.
Great points, BD. I mean, I mean, the whole Jeff thing. I mean, it's a child actor. Honestly, one of my biggest negatives with the episode, if my only thing, is Jeff. So I'm right there with you. That's why I don't give this a 5 out of 5. Quite honestly, if I wanted to be forgiving, I would say that this is probably one of the scarier episodes of the whole show. Like, at least in terms of execution, if it had maybe a better portrayal of Jeff, I would consider this a top 5 potential. Like straight up, like it's just that good for at least a single length episode. I mean, the execution is really well done.
And I forgot to mention as well, but also for the cat thing in the episode, Rip from Cry the Cat, eat your heart out, because that thing is a horrifying little motherfucker. He's scary as all hell. Also, shout out to Completionist background because the garbage disposal of death and the eyes of the cat matches his green aura over there.
Yeah, I got the neons on with my ring light. All right, Bruce, you had your hand up. Did you want to add something?
Oh yeah, I mean, small thing to ask you guys is that one thing that I think we have to realize though is that Jeff seems like he is a very young protagonist. I mean, very young. He is younger than any other kid in the show, main wise. So part of the olives thing, if I'm being honest, I was a little brat like that too when I was little, probably. But I don't know. I think he's all right, and it's passable knowing that I don't know if they were trying to make him a different age that was like older or whatever, but if they were trying to go for a very young like 4-year-old, because that's what he acts like, that's what he looks like, that's how he's portrayed almost. I feel like it's pretty passable. It's kind of interesting to see a very young protagonist in Goosebumps in general, or horror in general. Actually, I think that's really fun. I really like seeing uh younger protagonists besides the sister from Cuckoo Clock. But yeah, we
Yeah,
don't talk about.
I'm treating it as a short story. In the short story, they said Jeff is 2 years younger than his sister. She's 13, he's 11. So that's what I'll treat it as. He's just 11 years old. He's fine. I mean, his redeeming factor is again what he does in the kitchen at the end of the episode, which is a really good character moment. But just the over the top acting, that's not the actor's fault. It's just whatever direction they wanted. Um, and yeah, he's all right. I mean, I just think he's just sort of annoying in the beginning, but he ends up redeeming himself, so he's not a bad character by any means.
Yeah, before we get to Alejandro, one thing I want to add is that in the context of the short story and in the episode, I think the episode does this a little bit better as well. Now that I'm thinking about it, is that Jeff's whole shtick is that he's afraid, right? He gets pranked easy. He's easy to scare. That's why Kim walks all over him. So his arc is to overcome fears. He's petrified of this mummy. He's come face to face with this thing. He knows that it's alive, and he's the only one that shows up to put a fight to the mummy to end it. So that's his arc. That's him saying to his family, to his sister, "Hey, I'm not afraid anymore. So you can't pick on me." And at the end, you kind of get the sense that maybe Kim's not going to pick on him as much because Kim learned to respect him through that. So not only do you get an arc with Jeff, but you also get a lesson given to Kim as well, which I think is more prevalent in the episode, which I think it does a little bit better and it executes that idea that I think the short
Sure.
story was going for, but the short story wanted to punish Kim a little bit for being so mean, I should say. And I'm not saying that the episode needed that. I think if you had the dark ending there, who knows how that would have executed. But I do like how both characters kind of get mildly, or at least Kim gets redeemed in that way that I mentioned, but Jeff more so.
Yeah, I was also going to say, just as a brief, Jeff also gets a good line in there where he yells for his mom to stay back. And that's pretty important because the mom is sort of the caretaker figure. She's the one who redeems, kind of like reassures him during his nightmare thing that, she can protect him. So the fact that he told his mom to stay back, of all people, that's a pretty good moment out of Jeff. So again, shout out to the writers and producers, man. I tell people, give writers and producers their flowers. They've earned a lot of flowers during this show, and this is definitely one episode that we should do that for.
For sure, for sure. Let's move on to Alejandro. Alejandro, what's your thoughts on Don't Make Mummies episode?
So adding on to our conversation about Jeff, I'm gonna start off my gripes here about the episode. Jeff isn't the greatest of characters in the beginning. He obviously gets a lot better in the end, and I can kind of see the issues with him early on. His acting isn't phenomenal, in my opinion, or at all really. But he does the best he can, so I'll give him that. And of course, he's a younger actor. He doesn't have as much experience, of course, so I can kind of understand why. And of course, he's kind of annoying, but he's not my biggest issue. And actually, I might upset some of y'all, but my biggest issue is just the first 10 minutes, or more like 9 minutes, because I think the first scene with the mummy, which is terrifying, is coming in around the 9 minute mark. Yeah, the first 9 minutes weren't very good for me, especially since it felt like it was just going bam, bam, bam of the pacing. Like the first 3 minutes, there is a prank pulled on this kid. There is a mummy arriving on the front door, and they deliver the mummy to the basement, and they're already discussing stuff about the mummy and the lore. In 3 minutes, that's very quick. It's going flying by, and it just flies by from there on out. There's even a bit of filler, but it kind of adds up to the character arc, like showing how this kid is scared of mummies and his fear of the mummy. And now going into my actual positives, I actually really like the mummy in this episode. I don't really have much to add here. I know y'all pretty much say the same thing, but yeah, this mummy is terrifying. The smoke coming out of his mouth is a nice detail. I thought it was really creepy, and it's a nice creative little detail, I guess. It's very interesting that they threw that in there. And I thought the mummy's design, though it is pretty much the same as the design in Return of the Mummy, and it is the same mummy costume, it is still awesome. I think the lighting with it too, where it's in a dark basement most of the episode, or in a dark house, or being a black shadow, is very creepy. They obviously made the mummy very creepy for the episode, and wanted to make it frightening for kids, which is good. Of course, the mummy's still goofy because he's a walking mummy with a very dumb weakness that I found really cool. That weakness being the vase or jar, what the hell it is. I thought it was a really cool mechanic that they threw in for the climax, which is obviously the better part of the episode. Really like that part. And the character arc we get with the kid, Jeff, I think was really neat. And I was gonna bring this up before any of you brought it up, but yeah, there is a message in here. Getting over your fears. And I really like that they threw that in there. It is kind of a basic message, but it's done decently here, and I haven't seen that much in Goosebumps, surprisingly, for being about kids fighting monsters and stuff like that. So, kind of odd that I haven't seen that too much in Goosebumps. But yeah, it was nicely thrown in here. And of course, the ending. I really like the ending, though not as much as the actual book. But I like the cat design, and I thought it was a decent ending. And there was also some, I think, a little lore drop for the mummy. Or, sorry, no, there is a lore drop for the mummy, how he is actually cursed, I believe, dropped at the end. And of course, a little funny moment of realization of how the mummy may or may not have come to life. So I kind of like that. But yeah, the ending and the wrap up the episode is done really nicely. Overall, I'm gonna give this episode like an 8 out of 10. It's very solid. Could have been a lot better, and of course, Jeff's acting ain't the greatest.
Those are fair points. Especially the thing about Jeff's acting. I think we're all kind of in agreement that Jeff's acting isn't that good. And he kind of makes the character. It depends on what part of the episode we're looking at. I think early on he is kind of annoying because of his portrayal. But I also think later on he becomes more charming. But I like that you brought up the pace because I didn't really think about that. But it makes me think about the short story adaptations in the show as a whole. The ones that they did, almost all of them. Thinking back, I think like Awesome Ants has a similar issue. If you were ever going to bring up pace, where the story just starts off so random and then it gets way in over its head a little too quickly and it just throws you to the wolves. As in the episodes that we think of more like the two-parters, they have much more time to expand on, right? So, you know, the pace hitting the ground running, I want to say that that is an issue for maybe some book adaptations in the single length episodes. But I think in the short stories, you have to kind of like overlook the pace because they're trying to adapt 13 pages and stretch it, and they're trying to fit as many events as they can so they can stretch it. So, if they don't have anything to work with in that first 3 5 minutes, it'll be kind of boring and lose the audience. Edie, you have something you want to say?
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. That since it's 13 pages, I definitely overlooked the pacing because they're adding a lot more material and trying to expand it in the time frame. And I think that in general, Goosebumps has more problems with full-length books being 20-minute segments instead of 40-minute segments because like Night of the Living Dummy 2, the first 5 to 6 minutes of the Night of the Living Dummy 2 episode is literally bang, 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 bang. It's just throwing everything at you really, really fast as opposed to the book, which fleshed out a lot of character study. In a short story, there's really not much material, so they're kind of making it up as they go and adding it. So in reality, I know you brought up that people think that this is an original episode, even though it's not. But since it's a 13-page story being turned into a 20-minute segment, I don't really blame people for treating it as its own thing because I somewhat treat it as that as well.
Yeah, that is a fair point because when we look at the episodes that especially deviate a good amount from the source material, they almost become like the Elseworlds version of the story. Like this is the alternate version. This is the show's version. You can like the show's version of it more than the short story or the full book, and that's often the topics we're talking about in our Discord chat. Whether we think the episode or the book is better, because there's so much room for improvement the show sometimes thought they can do. And the prime example of that, we've talked about this so many times, is like Haunted Mass 2. And it's that how divisive that book is in the community. Majority of people seem to think that the show writers, they took a completely different direction, almost to make Haunted Mass 2's episode pretty much in name only in a lot of regards to the book. So don't Wake Mummy, I don't think is quite there. I think the premise is still pretty much the same idea, just tweaked a little bit. Like the climax and the dad being absent and the addition of the friend is basically the only real difference in the ending, of course. But everything else, the rudimentary sense is there. It just depends on what you like more. Speaking of which, let's see what Spongy likes more, so we can pick the representative for Don't Wake Mummies, so we can move on to Are You Afraid of the Dark?
All right, so let's see what Spongy has to say. This episode sucks ass. No, okay. Don't Wake Mummy episode. I feel like the rep of this episode has gone up over time, and I'm kind of part of that. I used to be kind of mid on it, finding Jeff to be sort of a, excuse me, finding Jeff to be sort of annoying. Now that's still a bit true, but I appreciate the good stuff more now. Pacing could be tighter, as it can spend. Pacing could be tighter. Jesus, pacing could be tighter as it can spend a bit too much time on fake out prank stuff, so I can see some it finding it dull. But man, the mummy is good. Makeup is strong, the climax is intense. Love how the mom is involved again. Acting is good with AJ Cook being decently charming enough to make her fun. I wish she got punished like in the story though. And then the mummy cat, Kingston, is as good. Both are mild good, but this one particularly has some high points. So yeah, it's good. Funny how the mummy dust doesn't quite have a payoff in either. It's true.
Bruce, you have something you want to add to that?
I don't know what the fuck that comment about the pacing was, but it's like the quickest paced episode in the series.
Yeah, I was. That's why I made a little bit of a comment. I mean, Spongy's entitled. I mean, he watches all this stuff, but the pacing, as we described it, is pretty fast. So if it could be even faster, no, we probably would have rated it lower. So I think the pacing is pretty much fine for what it is.
Yeah, I mean, by the time the mummy comes alive, it's like I think Alejandro said it was 9 minutes. There was a fake out prank, maybe one or two before that, and then Kim tried to do another one after the mummy came alive. But even then, like I didn't think it was that bad, personally. I mean, it's kind of added the context of the story between the relationship of the characters. Like it established the hierarchy of the family order. Like Kim, she thinks she's above Jeff, and Jeff has something to prove, and that's why Jeff has the arc he does.
I mean, I could understand like the maybe the dinner scene with the olives and like the watching a horror movie, but at the same time, those have payoff because it's setting up that hey, the kids are gonna be alone, and the horror movie, like I brought up, plays into what the climax kind of represents with the fighting. So at least it has a purpose, even if it may seem to be a little bit slow.
I mean, you can even make the argument that episodes like Bride of the Living Dummy, when you see the kids hanging out in the living room for like a minute or two, like, why is this here? I mean, anything could be filler like that if you really want to nitpick it. You know what I mean? It just depends. It just depends if it serves a purpose. you know. But I think we're all in agreement that Don't Wake Mummy's episode is good, and I think by a show of hands, who thinks that the Don't Wake Mummy episode is the real representative for the short story? Okay. I'm actually pretty much I can go either way, so I'm with y'all. I think the Don't Wake Mummy episode is fantastic. So now we got to move on to the Tale of the Guardian's Curse. I'm gonna pass it over to Micah for this. Tell us about the Tale of the Guardian's Curse.
So Tale of the Guardian's Curse is basically about two siblings. I can't remember their names, but they basically their dad is a archaeologist working at this museum, and they're wanting to go on this skiing trip with their dad. They're just about to head out, and it opens with their dad being entering the museum to check something. And one of his coworkers, I think his name is Dr. Cablesmith, I believe that's the guy's name, goes to him and tells him about this sarcophagus that they unearthed from behind a hidden wall that was in the museum. And this kind of takes up the dad's time because this is a very big discovery for them. So he kind of abandons the skiing trip, which makes the two siblings very upset about that, specifically the brother. And while they're kind of moping about this, they come across this mummy in the sarcophagus. And she was this goddess of, I can't remember exactly what the goddess she was the goddess of, but she was this ancient goddess. And they discover inside this sarcophagus there is a little like vial of some kind of elixir and a ring. And while the siblings are fighting over this, they accidentally spill some of the elixir onto the hand of the mummy. And so when they leave, the mummy kind of hints that it starts to come alive, and it's implied that this elixir had something to do with that. And meanwhile, their dad ends up getting basically kidnapped when they get back to his office, and they find the office ransacked. And they basically go back to the museum to try and figure out what's going on. They see some stuff with the mummy that's possibly alive. And when they eventually find their dad, who has been basically unconscious on the top of these like crates. And there's a big plot twist revolving around Dr. Cable Smith and just his whole motivation behind this archaeological dig. And something goes down there. I'm not going to spoil what, but that's basically the plot of this episode. And I'm not a fan of it. It's not bad. I don't think it's bad, but it's a very middle of the road Are You Afraid of the Dark episode. I gave it around a 5 out of 10. Like, there's a lot of meandering. It's pretty boring throughout the most of it, especially the early part of it. And honestly, I think the climax is very anticlimactic. Like, the whole thing with Dr. Cable Smith is just kind of lame, honestly. And it's like, of all the things you could do with a mummy episode, you went with this. And like, what happens to him in the end is decent. Like, it's a good kind of like, it's a bad effect, but at least it's somewhat, I don't know, representative. And he gets his comeuppance in the end. But like, why would you do this in a mummy episode? Like, you really should just focus on the mummy, I feel like. And the brother character is also very annoying, in my opinion. He's just very whiny and kind of, he gets on my nerves. It is cool though, because the dad in this episode is played by the same guy who played the dad in Night of the Living Dummy 3's episode. So that's kind of fun to see him in there because he's a good actor, and I think he does a good job in his performance in this episode. Um, but and also like what they did with the ending with the mummy, BD already kind of alluded to it earlier on, but it's weird and I don't like it.
Okay.
That's basically my thoughts.
Okay, yeah, I like that you brought that up because I guess I'll go ahead and share my thoughts on the Tale of the Guardian's Curse. Me and BD did a collab about like the top 5 kids horror stories that feel like DCOMs, Disney Channel original movies. And whenever I think about this episode, I think about every Disney slash 90s family movie cliche because you can spot him in here. I mean, look at the dad. Okay, so he's a single dad. He has 2 kids. That was a common trope in the 90s, but the dad's a workaholic, always too busy for the kids. Kids can't go on vacation without dad having to go to work. It's played up like that. And while it's not too offensive, most of the story is building on these characters wanting their dad just to be done with this so they can go on vacation. So they're trying to expedite this to get their way, but they end up causing more trouble than it needed to be. But it ended up actually saving them in the end by some, fate of circumstances because by activating the mummy by accident, the mummy and the unknowns with that were the catalyst for how the villain is stopped at the end. So it's dumb luck. And then they get a potential stepmom, let's just say that, out of the equation. And that is probably the cringiest thing I think I've ever seen in Are You Afraid of the Dark, bar none. Like one of the top 3 things that made me internally cringe when I watched it. And the dad, literally, when he sees the mummy woman, okay, mild spoiler, okay, I'm going to spoil this. She turns into her human form, which she's not bad looking, but he immediately gets smitten with her and he tries to riz her. I'm not kidding. And it is cringe. And it's implied that they're going to take her home with them. Yeah, bizarre. But yeah, this one to me is probably the most average Are You Afraid of the Dark episode, in my opinion. It's not like really good or anything, it's mostly fine. I do like the atmosphere of it being in a museum. I think that's really cool. It has that night at the museum aesthetic to it. There's some unknowns, and I think I honestly want to give Are You Afraid of the Dark's department some props here, pun intended. The mummy effects in this episode were really good. I mean, they were kind of chilling. I'm not gonna lie. If I would have saw that come, I actually think that would have petrified me more than the Don't Wake Mummy design. Seeing that come after me, oh my god. Good stuff, good stuff. And that scene where you see the mummy kind of like stick its hand out around the corner in the museum cellar, that was petrifying. Almost to the same level as that Don't Wake Mummy scene where Jeff sees the mummy. But that was some good stuff, and there's is some mild charm, like in that decom way. There's some heart to this one. It's kind of corny, but it works in that way. It feels wholesome, hunky dory, not quite scary or played up entertaining like a horror movie. But I think a lot of that has to do with the final act, which I think is pretty anticlimactic, like Micah said. It's just you get that over the top Disney Channel villain reveal with Dr. Cable Smith and like this big wannabe Indiana Jones villain motif. And the effects, good God Almighty, the effects in this episode, very primitive CGI. We're talking very primitive. You think Jake the Snake is bad? I mean, I think it's a little bit worse than this, but good Lord. Let's just say what happens to Dr. Capel Smith is pretty it'll make your eyes bleed a little bit. So yeah, that's
No,
my
bro. Effects were great. I don't know what you're talking about.
All right, let's pass it over to Alejandro. Alejandro, what's your thoughts on the Tale of the Guardian's Curse?
Well, to get my gropes out of the way, the ending. Kind of rambled on about this. So the ending. Yeah, it's not it, man. I don't want to see a like 3,000-year-old lady who, though not conscious for those 3,000 years, is still 3,000 years of age, and she probably, if they're, I mean, Are You Afraid of the Dark probably has some sort of ghost afterlife. She's probably been somewhat conscious for 3,000 years, wandering the spirit realm. So you're basically dating a 3,000-year-old spirit and a body of like, I don't even know, but probably someone a little younger than you, but also kind of older because it's a mummy body. It looks like a woman. It's so dumb. I originally didn't hate this ending, but upon rewatching earlier, it ain't it. Hold up, I got a battery warning. Anyways, my other gripe of the episode. All right, let me just read my notes here because I'm a freaking idiot. Besides the ending being really, really, really corny, I think this episode had a very annoying character, and that was the brother. I didn't absolutely hate him, and I think his acting is good. I just don't like the character that much. He's just a little annoying, all right? It's kind of like the sister in Don't Wake Mummy in the episode, only he's just whiny more than pranky, all right? More like Jeff, actually, now that I think about it. Anyways, to get into my actual positives about this episode, let's start off with the actual mummy in question. So, first, I didn't like the design because, I mean, why would you give a mummy tits? It's kind of weird, but it grew on me as it went on, and of course, I liked how the mummy looked when it was looking around corners and when you could see its shadow and stuff. It was creepily played out. It's not as good as Don't Wake Mummy, but we're not comparing them, at least not yet. Yeah, it's still a really decent mummy design, and I liked it. And it's interesting to have a female mummy antagonist, or antagonist, if we're being real here. Speaking of antagonist, I really like this guy for some reason. I don't know if it's just me, but I found his goofiness and his actually threat level to be really freaking nice. I actually thought it was really funny, but he was such a goofy looking and sounding even villain. He's just some random dude, museum owner, and he secretly wants to be immortal, and who knows what he's going to do with that power. Maybe burn down an orphanage, because he's going to burn the people alive, which I found to be a very creepy and dark twist if that was going to happen. But of course, that doesn't happen. They're not going to go there in this episode. And the twist involving his defeat, though I don't like the visual effects, I think it's decent. And it goes on from there into the mummy ending, which we shall not talk about. Anyways, the episode has decent pacing all throughout. I think it definitely took its time with things and didn't rush anything too much or spend too much time on stuff. I liked all the other characters besides the boy, slightly annoying character. And yeah, it was just a very decent story. And surprisingly, I think I enjoyed it a lot more than y'all did. I'd give this like an 8.5 out of 10. So yeah, Guardian's Curse was surprisingly good. And also, I forgot to mention the opening for the episode. It's actually really good. I think the setting is really nice and it looks great. I think it's in a mine or something. And when they find this sarcophagus, I think, yeah, that's a really nice scene. And those are my thoughts on the Guardian's Curse. Really, really solid episode.
Okay, that's interesting. Let's contrast it by moving over to let's try Bruce. Bruce, what's your thoughts on the Tale of the Guardian's Curse?
Well, my thoughts about this episode is my thoughts about a lot of my 7s, 8s, and 9s with Dark. And actually, I wanted to say this is that in previous episodes, I had not watched very many. now I have watched every Dark episode, not the revival stuff from like the new, like 2019 and on, but the older stuff, the 90s and I think partially 2000. All of those episodes I have now watched. And I gotta say that most of these sevens, eights, and nines are very average kids' horror stories. Now, the issue here is that there's nothing that really makes it stand out. I think that although I might have remembered it for a little while when I first watched it, it very quickly basically it went through one year out the other, and I had to rewatch it for this video because I just legit could not remember anything. And basically, besides that weird romance shit and this extremely annoying brother, there's not much that's very interesting to talk about. I mean, it's meat and potatoes, cookie cutter mummy story. Uh, Acting is fine. I don't think it's too special. The effects definitely a standout and probably some of the best in Dark, including the CGI. I mean, the CGI fantastic. I don't care about the mummy effects. All right, the CGI was amazing, and yeah, I mean overall episode is like a nice 8 out of 10. I don't have too many complaints. The things I do have complaints with basically just go back to that point I had where it's like, yeah, a lot of these episodes are just extremely average and it's kind of hard to get around that. I just think I give them a higher score due to how fun Dark is as a whole. I think that watching that series just like has a certain mood to it that I really like. Every single episode besides like 2 or 3, but yeah. Really thought that it was I wouldn't recommend it, but if you guys want to watch it, totally cool. But if you're looking for a good mummy story and you're not looking to read something, I would check out Don't Wake Mummy. Simple as that. I think that that's a great story, like we already mentioned. And I'd honestly, although I don't like it too much, I'd even recommend Return of the Mummy over this. Even though I think that that's generally a worse episode, there's a lot more interesting stuff happening, and somehow that sticks with me, and this does not. So
Okay, interesting take. Let's move on to BD. BD, what's your thoughts on the tale of the Guardian's Curse?
So I originally gave this episode a 7 out of 10. I was a little bit generous with that. I'm gonna bump it down to a 6.8, which is pretty much an okay, decent, fine episode for Are You Afraid of the Dark standard. It feels like a DCOM. Me and Comp have talked about this one plenty of times. Feels like a Disney Channel original movie. But that being said, there's quite a bit of things for me to roast about this episode, and I'm gonna do it. But first, I need to congratulate one of the members of the Goosejunkies podcast that have been lying to us about a certain thing involving their life. But I want to give some props. Alejandro, I want to clap it up for you. I'm very happy that you star in this episode as the brother. You did a pretty good job considering you have no acting experience. You did happen to put on the Ring of Eternity, which is why you look the exact same as you do in the episode now. But I'm proud of you, man. You know, this podcast, we're really improving. We really got some good talent here. So great job in the episode overall. I'm proud you made it to Are You Afraid of the Dark? That aside, Alejandro's acting in the episode has some questionable moments, specifically some of his lines. I think there's one line where the dad is looking at the sarcophagus of the mummy, and the brother, I think, like taps on it and goes, "She should have used some of that ring power right now so she can get out of the coffin." And I was like, "Man, shut up before I punch you through the screen." This man's comedy gets too much at points. Now he's sort of like charming. I have to, it's kind of like that stoner humor. Like, if you've ever seen like Bill and Ted and stuff like that, you got that sort of stoner humor, that sort of goofy, humor. It could sometimes be charming, but he whines a little bit too much in the episode. He's not bad, not terrible, but he has a few iffy moments. The sister figure is average. I think she's fine, pretty much standard for Are You Afraid of the Dark characters. I like the design of the mummy. This was brought up, but the mummy design is actually very creepy, and I have to 100% agree. That scene where that rotted hand reaches over the wall, and she moves over, and it's this decrepit looking woman, horrifying looking. That's actually pretty scary considering how corny the episode is. I also like the sort of setup to how this mummy is discovered. Put logic aside, the fact that there was a false wall in the museum and during renovation they happened to find it doesn't really make any sense in the grand scheme of things, but it feels very Disney where they have this magical discovery. Hey, the mummy was under our eyes the whole time. Look at it. And I actually like the idea that it's a goddess. That's very unique because most of the time when you get mummy stories, what happens each and every time? Oh, the pharaoh. Oh, the pharaoh's curse. The only Pharaoh's curse from Ramsey in this episode is the visual effects. But the Pharaoh trope basically gets run down in every single mummy story. So this one actually having a goddess, an actual powerful figure with magic and stuff, is really cool. And they actually give lore to Mina. I think the goddess's name is Mina. They actually give her lore that she used the Ring of Eternity and the elixir for fertility back in ancient Egypt. She would allow the crops to grow. She would allow them to prosper. And that's actually a really cool, I guess, lore behind the goddess Mina as to why she matters to Egypt. And then it gets into how she can turn people to stone. So you got a Medusa aspect with that, and she's a decrepit, scary-looking woman figure in the episode. So that's kind of a play on Medusa. But the main villain, because Mina's obviously not that involved. The main villain. Now I love Ahmed from Curse of the Mummy's Tomb book. Ahmed is horrifying. He's scary. He's a serial killer. He poses an actual danger level. This guy in Are You Afraid of the Dark, because Are You Afraid of the Dark always has to go the corny route. This guy is over the top. He's goofy. He's very much got that kind of feel as a villain where it's just, he wants to get the ring because why not? Why not just be eternal and have the most power in the world? So that's why he starts doing this grand Scooby Doo theme to basically take down the main characters. And it does very much feel like a Scooby Doo kind of villain. Like this is the sort of motive that you would see back in that show. And the effects. Holy Jesus, holy purple guy from FNAF. That is some of the worst visual effects I've ever seen. The dude was lit up like a lava lamp. It was stupid looking. And the fact that, that's the portrayal of turning, eternal, the fact that you glow like a neon light. In that case, I would rather die at 30. I don't want to look like that, if that's what eternity is. Again, a very goofy episode. The way that the main characters bamboozle the villain is expected, predictable. And the father figure, Dad from Night Living Dummy 3 episode, he's good. I like him. Every time I've seen him play a role, he's fine. I enjoy him. He's a good father figure. And then overall, pretty fine episode, but the ending is is Jesus cringe, man. All of a sudden, Cleopatra comes back to life in the form of the goddess, and Mr. Father gets hard eyes. Now that coochie is as dry as the Sahara Desert. You got clickbaited with the outside look, and I hope to God you guys don't have a baby, because when it comes to nursing, that stuff's gonna come out like chalk powder. So leave that alone. Don't try raising a family with that woman. But too late, too little, too late. They don't even speak the same language, man. They don't even speak. She speaks ancient Egyptian. How do you understand what she's gonna tell you? What, is this gonna be hand signs? You're just gonna be doing hand signs to communicate? It makes no sense. Don't even try to think about it. It's just that classic Disney route where love, no matter what happens, love triumphs. The outside doesn't matter. It's what on the inside. It's a freaking mummy, man. As far as I'm concerned, this man is smashing a reanimated corpse. Don't give me that howdy doody happy kumbaya ending stuff. All right, it is weird to think about. I 100% agree with Alejandro. So overall, 6.8 out of 10. Do I suggest you watch it? If you like Disney movies, yes. If you don't touch this. Just forget it. You're not missing much.
Bruce, you have something you want to add to that?
In terms of the mummy, all right, hear me out. All right, hear me out. That mummy. All right, I
Go
mean,
ahead.
can we blame the guy? I mean, come on. Can we blame that dude? That
I
mummy
don't blame him, but
fine. Oh my god, dude. If I got a chance to meet that mummy, you already know there better be a fucking bedroom right next door, because that is being smashed, dude. That is not a pass. That is a smash.
this whole
Oh
part's
my god.
getting cut out in
Chalk,
editing. Don't
chalk
listen to this
powder,
man.
even better. Love to see the outcome of that. Maybe you can maybe,
All
maybe
right,
you
let's take a
can
pause. Let's take a pause. And let's actually talk about. I want to add one thing before we get into our Victor here, and we go over Spongie's thoughts. Um, this actually is very reminiscent to a movie, a decom movie called Under Wraps. If y'all have ever seen that movie, it's basically a similar idea where you have another over the top villain, except it's the neighbor of this kid in Under Wraps, and he's trying to get this mummy to sell on the black market so he can make a lot of money. But the mummy's named Harold that comes to life, and Harold just wants to be with his wife at the museum. So the whole subplot is, of course, them getting the revenge on the over the top villain. And it quite literally could be the same story because the main character in Under Wraps, he has a single mom who's trying to get married to this other guy, so he feels disconnected from his parents, and he has to solve this mystery so he can get his friends out of the sticky situation they found themselves in. I honestly would say that if you're going to watch a decom mummy movie, go watch Under Wraps, the original 1997 version. Don't watch the remake now. And the remake has a sequel which is almost equally as cringe. But yeah, I, that's why I can kind of see the charm in it. It reminds me of that original Under Wraps movie, which is why I think it's fine. But let's move on to Spongy before we give away the victor, and then we'll get on to our discussion and close it out.
Also, before we do that, I also don't know if this is the case, but didn't Ben Stiller in Night of the Museum, didn't he also have a love interest? That was one of the exhibits from it. I don't know if I'm misremembering the
No,
movies,
I
but
think I think Cleopatra and Robin Williams playing Teddy Roosevelt, they had a connection or something like that. Or
okay,
no,
I,
It was Pocahontas. It was
it was
Pocahontas,
it
not
was
Cleopatra.
was that Sacagawea or is it
Oh yeah,
Pocahontas?
Sacagawea. That's what it was.
Sacagawea.
Yeah.
Okay. But it was kind of similar. It was
okay,
kind of
well,
similar.
that's better. That's between two exhibits, so I'll give that a
Yeah.
pass.
Okay.
All right, let's see
Let's
what
get into
Spongy has to say.
So should I watch Under Wrap?
Oh yeah, the original. I think it's free on YouTube. You can watch it.
Oh my God, this man wrote a freaking essay, dude. Jesus, this must really hit home for him. Guardian's Curse. I'm a bit conflicted with this one. Oh, okay, that's fine. In general, it was mostly fine. There isn't a lot of mummy action, and spoilers, the mummy we do get is not what we expected. Did Stein ghostwrite this? Even with that, there's some fun stuff in the latter half, and I dig the setup with the museum and finding the mummy. Josh is played by Danny Cooksey, who feels a bit out of place, like Melissa Joan Hart did, but in a good way. The character is the kind of little shit with whining about the dead. Also, Danny Cooksey is also Alejandro's real name, so don't trust his birth certificate. That's actually what his name is, but he changed it over the years. We caught you, bro. The character was the kind of little shit whining about the dad, a typical '90s teen, if there ever was one. But the actor made him fun for me. There's a workaholic dad thing, and it's done decently. The dad is shown to care, and there's a nice scene with them. Cleo, the sister. Oh, I get it, is understanding even if Josh isn't. The true villain is typical and not especially great, but he is kind of fun for being a different type of show, for being different type for this show. The defeat was cool and kind of clever. What bugs me, besides the lack of the mummy action, is the ending. The reveal with the mummy is fine, and there's not much resolution with the dad arc here. The closest we get to it is just weird, if that's what it's meant to tie into. And if that's not the implication, then we just don't get much despite it being important. I like how the show tries to add these character aspects to the stories, so having it underdeveloped before here is a letdown. It's good enough before that, even if I wanted a bit more. I don't know, but I do know it falls more on the high, decent line. I enjoyed it. I just wanted more out of the story. That's all.
Yeah, that's a fair shake because I think the story itself is nothing special. I think that's pretty much the big delineation between Don't Wake Mummy and this is that this one feels so average and like textbook to so many other things in the Mummy subgenre or things similar to it. As in, Don't Wake Mummy feels unorthodox. It feels a little bit strange. It feels like something that shouldn't work, but it stands out for that and it makes it weirdly work. So it's like comparing something being more daring and more different versus something that feels most like the same thing, same old song and dance. So the story itself, even if you take the mummies out of the equation, it feels like a lot of '90s cliche stories that you saw in media back then. So it doesn't really separate itself, at least in terms of kids' horror and mummy stories, which I think is a good way to kind of go into the victor of this. I think it's a clear winner here. We have Don't Wake Mummies episode facing off against Tale of the Guardian's Curse. I think that Don't Wake Mummies episode is the clear winner here. If we're talking Goosebumps versus Are You Afraid of the Dark, this is another clear Goosebumps victory. And it's kind of like a landslide for us. I think, minus Alejandro, which I think he would say that Guardian's Curse is better. Would you?
Slightly. I know it has necrophilia and all that, borderline. But it's 0.5 better. 8.5 comparing to an 8 out of 10 episode.
Okay.
So slightly better.
So, I can kind of see that, if you're more forgiving on certain things that we weren't. But I think a lot of us just appreciate Don't Wake Mummies, its style, its unorthodox nature, and its ability to be scary. I think that's the biggest thing when we compare these, is that which one has a scarier product, which one is more revisitable. And I think for us, at least this panel, we all seem to appreciate Don't Wake Mummy more. So we're going to give the victory here to Goosebumps, which is pretty telling. And I know we're not trying to be biased out there, but Goosebumps tends to win a lot, at least so far. We haven't gotten way down the line yet. Are You Afraid of the Dark may be able to turn the tide, but Are You Afraid of the Dark is still pretty comparable. I think we would go out of our way to say you can watch or read everything that we brought up with these two stories. Which brings us to our discussion, because we were kind of struggling with a topic, but we decided to talk about Goosebumps mummy stories, because there's so many mummy stories. As a matter of fact, there's a new one coming out in House of Shivers, Night of the Living Mummy, and you can look across different R.L. Stine IPs. There's so many R.L. Stine mummy stories out there. Even if you go back to the 80s, one of his first stories he ever wrote for kids horror is The Horrors of the Haunted Museum. I think that's what it's called. And there's a mummy on the cover, and it's literally kind of like Guardian's Curse a little bit. But it's a choose your own adventure book. So R.L. Stine and mummies, I think that's his favorite monster to write. I think, maybe next to werewolves back in the day, he loves to write mummies, and there's so many out there. Let's just throw it out in the open. Who wants to go with this first? Alejandro, you want to go first, or BD? Let's start with BD. BD, what's your favorite Goosebumps mummy story, or one that you think people should pay a lot of attention to?
Now, I've not read a lot of mummy stories from R.L. Stine. I kind of been holding off on them for the reason that you brought up. There are so many mummy stories that it's just sort of something that I kind of want to keep for when I'm in the mood for. But there is a mummy story that I've made videos about. I've talked about it, saying that it's underrated. I think that it deserves more love. And that is The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb. Now, this was one of the first Goosebumps stories that was a mummy book. And I see the problems with it. People don't like gay. People don't like sorry. I get that they're annoying. I don't deny that by any means. But the Curse of the Mummy's Tomb book has a lot of intense, really dark, really disturbing scenes in there. The second half of Curse of the Mummy's Tomb is probably one of the best things I've read in Goosebumps, and is genuinely something that very much impressed me as to Stein's writing. This was during the early books when Stein was experimenting, trying to see what he can get away with and do. And Ahmed is one of the most terrifying Goosebumps villains out there. He's easily in my one of the easily top 10 best Goosebumps villains. He is dark, he's sinister, he's a serial killer, he's not afraid to threaten the main characters, he's not afraid to take lives, and he actually has a body count. He actually is a very prominent threat in that book. And you first get a kidnapping scene in the marketplace in Egypt, and that is real life horror. Kids getting kidnapped, the whole stranger danger kind of thing. The fact he did this elaborate setup to try to catch them, and they start running away through the marketplace as he's assumingly chasing them. That's really, really intense, really scary, and it only ramps up from there, because once they revisit the mummy's tomb, you find out that Ahmed may or may not have connections to one of the lineage within that tomb, and you find out that he's a serial killer. So just a bit of spoilers ahead. Ahmed has killed a lot of victims who have ventured into the tomb, whether it be tourists or invaders or whatever, and he kills them, and he does it through the mummification process. So a lot of you have probably heard it. It's described in the book, where you take a hook through somebody's nose, pull out the brain through there, put their heart and organs in jars. He does that with people, and there's a giant flaming tar pit that you use to mummify the bodies, he throws them in there. And it's hinted that he throws them in there while they're alive. So they have to burn to death. And then he does that with the corpses and sets them up as mummies to kind of put up a false persona. That is so disturbing. That kind of stuff Stein would not be able to get away with in modern books, even if he wanted to take chances. And you get a real good redeeming moment between Gabe and Sari. They Yes, they're bad characters, but then you see them put in life and danger. And you see Gabe actually start trying to, sympathize with Sari, try to make her feel better. There's a point where they're stuck inside of the coffin and something may or may not happen to Uncle Ben and not Spider-Man. And Sari basically feels that, you know what, we may be alone in this. We lost our guardian figure. We're going to die at any moment. And Gabe has to then step up. He then has to be the one to sort of be the backbone to make her feel confident, at least until Uncle Ben comes back. And when they solve the problem, the way it's solved involves a gimmick that was introduced early into the book. And it is horrifying. If you guys like scenes like Vampire's Breath with Count Nightwing's castle and being surrounded around horrifying things, this very much is that. You're in a dark, dingy place, you're isolated, and you're surrounded around terrifying things. And something happens to Ahmed that I would not wish on anybody, but he definitely deserves it. I mean, it is horrifying to the point and great. And you get a great family bonding moment towards the end of the book where the characters group together and they put aside their differences, and it wraps up quite nicely. So, Curse of the Mummy's Tomb is my pick. I get people have the problems with it, but I actually really enjoy the book. I'd probably give it like 8 out of 10. 8.5 out of 10, higher than most people would. And I suggest you give it a chance, at least for that second half.
Yeah, I've mentioned this plenty of times and like in the Discord, but I feel like I could probably make a video talking about it. Where like I think this book, Night of the Living Dummy and The Curse of Camp Cold Lake, all suffer from the same issue. The first half is pretty much dog crap. Okay, like it's not that good. It's a little too slice of life, a little too filler, a little too prank heavy, a little too mean spirited. The list goes on. But that second half is pretty much peak Goosebumps. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I'll give my roses to Stein for Curse of the Mummy's Tomb. That has some of the best Prouse writing I have read in Goosebumps. Period. The description and atmosphere, Gabe's detailed monologue in the story, everything about the writing of that book feels top shelf Stein. Like I've never read a book that played that the way that book played out from Stein himself. I think that's probably his best written book I've read. Like in terms of writing quality, I'm not talking about story or anything or execution. I think that back half, though, that second half of that book is genuinely perfect. I mean, 10 out of 10. Some of the best moments in Goosebumps, especially that climax with Ahmed. A plus. All right, you can't go better than that. But that first half, good God Almighty, with Gabe and Sari fighting the whole time and just endless prank stuff with Uncle Ben. That got old. And yeah, and then once it kicks on, it does kick on though. But great pick, great pick. Let's pass it over to Bruce. Bruce, you have something you want to add?
So I actually really enjoy Curse most of the way through. I think actually I'd move it more towards the first fourth being kind of rough and then the rest being great instead of the first half. But I think that the sequel, book 23, Return of the Mummy, not only takes that idea, kind of alters it, and has the mummies being the main focus this time, but actually improves on a lot of things I had issues with in that first book. Pacing is done a bit better here. Um, I think that, like Completionist said, there's a lot less. Well, in that first book, there is a lot of filler. There's a good like 30 pages you could probably throw out the window and mind it. With this, I think that it's very nicely paced. I really like how the characters are in this book. They're, although somewhat the same, they definitely have developed, and I think that the writing is honestly just a lot better. However, you kind of lose some things like that terrifying villain, but in all honesty, this is one of my favorite Goosebumps books. I really like this one. I think that it's also one of the best ones to start with, even if it is a sequel. So that's out there if anyone wants to check this one out. I'd actually recommend this one over the first book. Um yeah, the first book, I'd also recommend it. However, the mummies aren't a huge part of the focus here. So kind of have to disagree on that one. But the second book is definitely worth it. And I'd also even say Mummy Walks is very good too. So yeah, those first three Mummy stories, really great.
You know, one thing about Return of the Mummy that I think I like more is that the story's more concise. Um, I don't think it's as good written as Curse of the Mummy's Tomb. It doesn't have that A+ quality writing or that Ahmed villain. Personally, if you want to know my thoughts, I think Princess Neela is pretty cool in the story, but Prince Karu, y'all, has to be one of the my least favorite Goosebumps villains. I mean, this mummy in this book. I mean, even in the episode, he's treated like a complete joke, and like all the serious moments that happens in the story, it's not even of his doing, and he's not really an actual villain. It's recontextualized in the book that he gets what what he wants to get vindication for. Let's just say with a certain character. So. He ain't all that, and how he became a mascot, I can kind of see why mummies are cool. You know, you see the iconic mummy on the skateboard fabric and all that from the they had it on backpacks on bed comforters for Christ's sake. Prince Karu, he's a Goosebumps mascot, but his book I think is pretty average. So average to me is good. So not bad pick, Bruce. Micah, let's move on to you. What's your favorite mummy story in Goosebumps?
Well, I haven't had a lot of exposure to Mummy stuff just because I'm reading through the series in like the original series in book order. And right now I've only gotten to book 12. So all I've had for the books is Curse of the Mummy's Tomb, which I wasn't a huge fan of. I think the climax is really good, and I think that kidnapping scene is really good, but like the rest of the book is just kind of a slog to get through for me. And it's probably my second to least favorite of that first 10. And then the other three have been Return of the Mummies episode, Don't Wake Mummies short story, and Don't Wake Mummies episode. And so of that mix, Don't Wake Mummies episode is my favorite, and I've already kind of shared my reasons why in the discussion about it, but that's just my opinion on it from what I've been exposed to so far.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think Don't Wake Mummy, the book, the short story and the episode, I think are my top favorite. But I'll save the one I'm going to mention because I want everybody to experience this book. So maybe Alejandro might mention it. I don't know. Alejandro, what is your pick of your favorite mummy story?
Well, I'm pretty sure you picked the other modern Mummy story that is out currently, at least, because Night of the Living Mummy isn't coming out till September. I picked Night of Crap. The Dummy Meets the Mummy. This is an actually non-slappy focused slappy book, and I love this book for that. I don't know if I would give this thing a 10 out of 10 across the board like I used to, because it has been a while since I actually read it, but I still remember quite a lot about it because it is a very memorable collab book, if you want to put it like that. And mostly because of the actual villain of the book, which is a mummy this time. It ain't a human character, which I do appreciate in Goosebumps. The mummy is actually a threat. And some of the stuff he does in the book is really terrifying. He throws people across rooms, to put it lightly. And there may or may not be some gore in one of the first few chapters, actually, involving a mustache. So I'll let your mind wander with that. Yeah, this mummy is a huge threat. He is insanely strong, kind of like the mummy in Don't Wake Mummy's episode, where he breaks the chair. Yeah, only it's amplified quite a bit in this book. So Erogotus the mummy is a huge threat, and that's why I like him in this book. It's the first genuine threat of a mummy, I do believe. Besides Don't Wake Mummy, which someone might be mentioning here soon. Yeah, this book has a great story. Slappy's parts in it are even good, and I don't even like Slappy that much in Goosebumps. Let alone, I don't even like him at all, honestly, anymore. I'm getting sick and tired of him, if I dare say that. Don't hate on me. But Slappy in this book is still really good. He has some good scenes around here. I think the first interaction of Slappy we get is really funny and also really scary because he kind of breaks the formula a little bit, kind of revealing his living self very early on. And it kind of wanders into the museum plot line of the book. And this is all early on stuff, so I'm not trying to spoil the climax, but the climax has a lot of very fun stuff thrown in there too. And yeah, this is a high recommendation, especially if you're not the biggest fan of Slappy, more of a fan of crazy, powerful villains like Arrow Goddess, because he is insanely powerful in this book, and is easily my favorite mummy. That's what Prince Karu should have been, might I add. So yeah, so Dummy Meets the Mummy, awesome collab book.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I love Dummy Meets the Mummy. I think it's one of my favorite moderns. It's just one of those books. It's a monster fight. It's a mashup. Aragotis and Slappy. You got modern Slappy who's overpowered, and then you got this Aragotis mummy who's a big threat in the story, and they face off. It's so much fun. And the story is also set, I think, in a museum as well. They had like the kids have like a museum dad or something. They had like a field trip or a sleepover or something. I can't remember the exact details, but the whole atmosphere to that book really worked. And I think the gore you brought up, spot on. I think Aragotis is easily one of the better mummy characters in all of Goosebumps. So great pick. Um, the one I want to put more attention to, I think I've mentioned this book, and I will constantly mention this. This is one of the most overlooked and underrated modern Goosebumps gems y'all have to experience. At least the main story. You don't have to read the Enter Horrorland segment at the end if you don't want to. It's spoiler. It's a Horrorland book. It's Who's Your Mummy. Now this book is batshit. Okay, nothing about this book should work. Okay, this is one of those Goosebumps stories that Stein is throwing a lot of things at the wall here. I mean, the concept is kind of all over the place, but it's also really riveting at the same time. So you got these two kids. They have this ill grandmother. The grandmother is sending them to go stay with their uncle who lives in this castle or this like, weird village out in, northeast United States. And they get there on this like off this train, I think, and they're taken by this cab driver over to this property, and they meet their uncle, who's an eccentric Egyptian artifact collector, and his whole house is decorated with Egyptian artifacts. He has a whole room and everything dedicated to it. As a matter of fact, he has a secret room with mummy bodies in it. Okay, and the kids are like, "Okay, this is weird. Why is our uncle doing this?" And it seems like the uncle may or may not have some motivations with them being there. Let's just say, and the kids start to catch wind on it. They try to escape, but later on, they learn the uncle's motives and they learn about exactly what's going on with these mummies. And it may or may not involve something very weird, it might be hair. But let's just say there's some gross scenes in this book that I think are some of the most vividly described, disturbing things I have read in Goosebumps, bar none. I mean, there are stuff involving mummy guts. And yeah, I won't even go further than that, but just you can use your imagination. What could be done nasty with mummy guts? Yeah, it's in there. And some legitimately creepy scenes involving it's kind of like a callback to those old mummy books at the same time where the kids are put into these sarcophaguses, so to speak. And there's something about that, and like the claustrophobia of that, and the realization of the situation they're put in, is very harrowing. And how that plays into the ending is also very fun. It has one of the more fun climaxes I've seen in modern Goosebumps. And then the ending is also weirdly strange, but I love it for that as well. It's a book that sticks with you when you read it. It's hard to describe, but if you read this one, I think all of you will love it because I know a lot of you have similar tastes that I do, like with like batshit books. You're probably gonna love this one. I'm just saying. I know Bruce, and I know you're just getting into moderns. This is one you should try. I mean, it's only like 100 pages in terms of the main story. It flies by really quick. The pacing is really good. The character stuff is actually pretty sweet and heartening at this, but at the same time, also kind of terrifying because their grandmother's their caretaker and they're going to be orphans without her. So there's some stakes with that. So you don't really see that in Goosebumps all that often. So I think there's something in this one for everyone. And
Hmm.
anybody else want to add anything before we close out? All right, so that wraps up our Don't Wake Mummy versus the Tale of the Guardian's Curse. Let us know down in the comments section down below whether you agree with our assessments or not. I'm also going to put in the description in the comment section all of these great people, all their social stuff. Where you can find them on YouTube and maybe on Instagram or somewhere. They're great folks. Please go sub up the Horror Tavern. Go sub up Goosebumps Enthusiasts. Also, go sub up Bruce's Metal Horror Bruce channel. Go sub up Goosebumps for Dummies. Go follow Spongy444 on Twitter. And please go sub up the Ultimate Goosebumps, man. They're all great folks. And we have another episode planned for you next time for episode 16. We're going to be doing addiction themed stories. So this is going to be a lot of fun because we have a hotly debated Goosebumps book we're going to be comparing to a Haunting Hour episode. We're going to be doing Let's Get Invisible versus Catching Cold. Now, both have written versions and episode versions, so it's going to be an interesting episode, I would say. And we're going to keep it kind of open for discussion. We haven't decided that yet. So, yeah, thank you all for tuning in. Until next time, take care and have a great night.